I'll give you an example. You had 530,000 people who used apps to be flown into the United States in violation of federal immigration law, specifically the idea of parole, where Biden and his thugs decided to rewrite that whole section of the law. In other words, to pervert it. And so they intentionally bastardized what parole means and gave them 2 years gratis in the United States. And he flies them in. Remember, he did it under cover of dark. Then they said, oh, no, this is great. And they brought, who's going to pick the lettuce? If the Venezuelan gang members aren't going to pick the lettuce, who's going to pick our lettuce? One of the reasons I don't eat lettuce very much. But anyway, so there we are. Trump says, these people have to go. Wait a minute, says this left-wing kook judge. They all have a right to due process. What? I have to turn to MSLSD, a legal analyst on MSLSD, a criminal defense lawyer, to help straighten this out. Now, he does it in a way that's a little confusing. But what I hope you'll get out of this is it's not black and white, this due process issue. In fact, Congress has passed statutes that define due process in a way that it's not really due process at all. Expedited deportations is a perfect example. So let's take a listen to this, gentlemen. Hat tip to Citizen Free Press. MSNBC legal analyst. Go.
Federal law allows for even broader and speedy removal than has been used in the past. And expedited removal, as you talked about, allows for summary removal. That means no entitlement even to a hearing, possibly within 24 hours. It hasn't been used as broadly as, say, the Trump administration might want to use it. But under the statute, it is permissible to remove aliens who arrive at the border and even those who have been here for 2 years, although that 2-year provision you talked about is the lesser used in practice. But just because it isn't used very often doesn't mean it's not a part of federal law that can be used. And it will be used because it's permitted under federal law. The Congress, in its infinite wisdom, decided that aliens who arrive at the border, and they define people who arrive at the border as people who have even been here 2 years, if they have fraudulent documents, if they don't have sufficient documents, they can be removed in an expedited fashion unless they seek asylum. So you don't run into those due process concerns, at least presumably because that statute, as it exists today, is still valid.
Now, I guarantee you they weren't expecting this from this guy, or he wouldn't be on the show. Matter of fact, as I watch him, Mr. Producer, maybe we ought to bring him on our show. Go ahead.
Now, that's not what's at stake with the Venezuelans and the Alien Enemies Act. But the government's argument is that, hey, court, listen, you're telling us we need to provide notice. Well, take a look at this federal law. It says that we don't even need to have a hearing. It can happen within 24 hours. So if that's good enough for people who arrive here who are aliens, it's certainly okay for people that the president has deemed to be alien enemies.
And of course, that's been the problem. A lot of the problems with the court is they didn't just go the way Barack Obama did. They did Alien Enemies Act. They went back a couple of 100 years for an act that doesn't even apply now because we're not at war with Venezuela.
Well, it's always great to hear the constitutional expert, Joe Scarborough, there. Well, we're not at war. It talks about an invasion. It doesn't talk about a war. Okay? Invasion is what the act says. It doesn't say a war. Go ahead.
First of all, and then secondly, again, it's one thing to deport somebody back to their home in Honduras. It's quite another to send them to the most heinous prison in El Salvador.
Oh, that's an issue now? So due process means they have to go to the home they came from, that we can't deport them to wherever we wish to deport them? Where's that written in the Constitution? Nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. Go ahead.
Garcia's a little different. He wasn't removed under the Alien Enemy Act because he's not a Venezuelan.
No, he was removed because he had 2 hearings, due process, administrative immigration law judges. He had 1 hearing in which the judge concluded he should be deported, and that the evidence suggested he was in fact a member of MS-13. Then he appealed it, and the Immigration Board of Appeals, second due process hearing, said, yeah, we agree with the lower court judge. But they didn't directly seek to deport him because of the potential danger from another gang. So the assumption was that he was an MS-13 gang member, which the Democrats have denied. How they know, I don't know, but they want to believe that he's not, but he is. And then secondly, the gang that he was concerned about no longer exists in El Salvador, and he's from El Salvador. And so even if he were brought back, they would turn around within 15 minutes and send him back. And this is the cause célèbre of the Democrats. This guy is a multi-time wife beater. We know that from her lips. We know that from the form that she filled out and signed in her own hand. He is a member of MS-13. That was the conclusion of 2 due process hearings, administrative immigration law judges. We do know it. We know that he was trafficking because he was found in a car without a license with 7 individuals without any identification. And when they were stopped, the individuals scattered. And so it's believed, known, that he was trafficking in people. And that's the guy the Democrats and their judges are holding out as an example of why Donald Trump is violating the Constitution. Sick. Go ahead.
And so that whole argument about Venezuela being the enemy or Tren de Aragua being the enemy doesn't apply. But you're absolutely right. If he comes back, what due process is he even entitled to? Well, probably the government will go back to the immigration court and challenge or reopen his case. Because remember, the only thing that kept him here was a withholding of removal order from, I believe, 2019. So they can go back to that court, try to reopen that case and say, hey, since then, he's done some bad things.
And since then, the very gang that he said he was afraid of doesn't exist. He'd be out of here in a second. And this is their big case. Go ahead.
Now, factually, you can argue, hey, no, he didn't do any of these bad things.
But Danny,
he's fine.
Even that's just limited to don't send him back to El Salvador. They could deport him to Honduras.
Exactly. You make a really good point.
Not that good. They can send him to El Salvador. What's to stop them? Nothing. I'm not aware of any constitutional principle. Go ahead.
Which is, again, everyone's saying, hey, bring him back, give him due process. But that due process may mean he can go to any of the other, 200 or so countries?
Right.
Other than El Salvador.
He's from El Salvador. Yeah. He's from El Salvador. They sent him back to El Salvador. They said, well, he can go to Honduras. To go to Honduras, Well, you just said he should go back to his home country. His home country is El Salvador. That's where that prison is. Go ahead.
And that's why I'm cautioning folks. This whole idea of due process, everyone's saying it, well, this is what they're entitled to, the Supreme Court said. But as a criminal defense attorney, I can tell you that due process sometimes feels a little hollow. Going to your point about habeas, I file habeas petitions all the time.
Hold on. And so do prisoners. You know what prisoners use to file habeas petitions? Let me show you some. This. I am filing a habeas petition. I don't know why I'm here and I shouldn't be here. That's all they have to do. They write it on toilet paper. They write it on Kleenex. They write it on the back of cereal boxes. It's true. They submit them to the courts, and the courts say, okay, great, next case. Just because you file a habeas petition doesn't mean a thing. In most cases, the courts just throw it out, which is about what I think he's going to say. Go ahead.
It's a slightly different statute because I'm usually dealing with criminal defendants. These are detainees. But the vast majority of habeas petitions are denied without even an evidentiary hearing.
Okay, got that? Because the judge reads it and says, yeah, you know why you're here. Denied. So you have a right to seek a habeas hearing, but you don't have a right to have one. That's it. So again, the media, the Democrats, they throw this out like it's, oh my God, he didn't have a habeas petition. Oh my God, he must be Hitler, Trump. He didn't get a due process hearing. Oh my God, Hitler again. It's so pathetic, the misinformation and disinformation that's being fed to the American people. Go ahead.
In fact, rare is the case where you get an evidentiary hearing.
An evidentiary hearing would be, you know what? This guy who filed this thing, maybe he has a point. Let's bring him in. The courts have no time for this nonsense, just so you know. Let's bring the person in. Let's hear what they have to say. That's a whole rigmarole. Almost never happens. Almost never happens because it's a ruse, usually by guilty people. Now, there are important instances of habeas hearings. Please don't get me wrong. These aren't them. I'll give you an example. You had 530,000 people who used apps to be flown into the United States in violation of federal immigration law, specifically the idea of parole, where Biden and his thugs decided to rewrite that whole section of the law. In other words, to pervert it. And so they intentionally bastardized what parole means and gave them 2 years gratis in the United States. And he flies them in. Remember, he did it under cover of dark, then they said, oh no, this is great. And they brought who's going to pick the lettuce? If the Venezuelan gang members aren't going to pick the lettuce, who's going to pick our lettuce? One of the reasons I don't eat lettuce very much. But anyway, so there we are. Trump says, these people have to go. Wait a minute, says this left-wing kook judge. They all have a right to due process. What? Now, keep something in mind. Those 530,000 in particular, we know exactly who they are. How do we know? From the app. We have a whole list of them. We know their names. We know them. And so you can turn the list in and say, these are the people we are deporting. There's no confusion about who they are. Thank you, Joe Biden, at least for keeping a list. Your Honor, they have a right to due process. Due process for what? Are they not who the list says they are? No, that's not why they want to give them due process. To throw a monkey wrench in the process, to slow it down until Trump is gone. Hope for a Democrat president. What this is backdoor massive amnesty, revolution by immigration, Cloward and Piven overwhelm the system, judicial despotism, all lined up against we, the people, essentially taking our franchise away. We voted for this man for president, we voted for his agenda, and the unelected judges and the unelected petitioners, that is lawyers who are bringing the cases, they're all working hand in glove. Schumer said they're progressives put there for the purpose of thwarting Trump. These are nothing more than ambulance chasing, slip and fall lawyers dressed up as judges. That's what's taking place. So I thought this guy did a pretty decent job of laying it out, and on, of all places, MSNBC. Kudos to him, and maybe we will bring him on. Seems honest enough, unless, of course, I'm not going on Mark's show, no way. We get that too, you never know.
For all this and much more, sign up for Levin TV.